Da pacem Domine in diebus nostris.
And with the sound made by banging the holy starter, we begin this, the podcast where I, your host Gary, humbly share what's been going on in my world of G.I. Joe. Whether that's current events, recent acquisitions, what I'm reading, watching, experiencing, or just plain old playing with my toys. And if you're a first-time listener, welcome, because on the second half of every episode, I take time to look at a vehicle or playset from the G.I. Joe line. This is the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod. And what's special about this episode is this is the first episode of the second year of the podcast. So I just recently passed the first anniversary of starting and editing and publishing. And here we are today. It's Yojo June. That's going on. If you're on Hasbro Pulse, they're going to be rolling out the G.I. Joe news all month long, like last year. It's been hard for me to stay on top of them, as they tend to do these during my workday. So it's going to be hard for me to stay on top of the news this month, especially as work's been busy for me. But looking forward to what they have coming. Hopefully, there's more O-rings in O-ring news. That's what I'm into. I know that the classified line is still going strong. I'm still pre-ordering classified figures. I'm not out of the line yet. I still think that scale is a wonderful scale for action figures and some highly detailed toys. But I'm just not sold on it because I've invested so heavily in the O-ring G.I. Joes. So, but still looking forward to seeing what's coming up. I know that the reveals for Mindbender has me excited. You know, Tomex and Zaymot, the Viper 3-pack, just ordered those off of Amazon. I found they were available for pre-order. And hey, who knows? Amazon will probably deliver before Hasbro Pulse anyway. Moving on into some recent acquisitions. I haven't really bought much lately since I gave up the buying G.I. Joe toys for Lent. I haven't really gotten back into the swing of things. I'm still perusing my favorite site, Mercari, right now, because sometimes there's deals to be found, incredible deals. And shortly after releasing my last episode of the Cobra Maggot, they had a Cobra Maggot on there, complete, more on that later, for $35. And looked at the pictures. It was kind of blurry, so you couldn't see the cannon tip, but it had the radar dish. And I was like, well, $35, radar dish, got to pay shipping, but I felt it was a pretty steal of a deal. Played it, and then a week later it comes in, and the cannon tip was broken off, and it was replaced with a white cap. However, it was a steal of a deal. I rated the guy, didn't give him 5 stars on Mercari. What do I do? I had 1 incomplete maggot. Now I have 2 incomplete maggots. Do I take the 2 and squish them together? So I made a poll, put it out on Twitter, and it was a close one. But overall, the people that follow me on Twitter chose get a new cannon rather than go the whole thing of combining the 2, make one nice one, and then get rid of the remaining parts. So thank you, listeners, for making my collection larger. It only aggravates my wife more, and I'm here for that. So that was really the big thing. I did order a couple more things a couple days ago. Those are in the post. Just looking forward to those coming in. One of those is something for a July review, and I'm pretty excited about that. So, so yeah, not spending too much on action figures right now. And then finally, I'm officially out of my storage unit, which is helping the monthly budget. Now I'm working on getting the basement a little bit more organized, and I've made arrangements with the wife to move the car out this weekend coming up, and I'm setting up a dehumidifier in the garage, and going to start emptying the basement into the garage. I feel that's a more prudent solution than getting a pod, and then things will go up into the garage, and then I'll set up storage racks that I've been buying from Home Depot, and then what we decide to keep goes back down into the basement, and then what stays in the garage goes out for a tag or garage sale. So a great way to get rid of the stuff, not have to worry about shipping and stuff, and I'll advertise it and stuff on my personal accounts. So this way, people can come in and make make offers on things like a broken Terradrome. So just to get rid of, create room, because I got another project I have my eyes on that is going to need a lot of room in the garage, and my wife doesn't know about that yet. So it's larger than a flag, so it's going to be a lot harder to sneak in, and she will know about it. But that brings to the crux of the biscuit for this episode. I mean, I am titling this episode Hopping in the APC to Go Get Some Comics. So let's talk some comics. And since 2 episodes ago, there were 2 G.I. Joe comic books released that I was waiting for this episode to talk about, and that was Saturday Morning Adventures 3 and G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero 292. But let's begin with the Saturday Morning Adventures number 3. We start off with the creative team. We got Eric Burnham, the writer, Dan Shaning, the interior artist and cover A, Luis Antonio Delgado, the colorist, Neil Utaki, the letterer, and Tom Waltz, the editor, Riley Farmer, associate editor, and Diana Davis, research specialist. So the same team as the previous 2 issues. We also have cover B by Phil Murphy, and the retail incentive cover by Will I hope I don't mess this up. Will Megnew. So sorry, that's probably completely butchered. To start off with, the cover A by Shaning is great. It's the genie over the Terradrome. The image evokes those classic VHS DVD covers of years past. Cobra Commander is lower center of the page as he's flanked by 2 HISS tanks in the foreground of the Terradrome. To his right are Ripper, Zorana, and Monkey Wrench, and to his left are Cobra Troopers. Behind him are Destro and the Baroness. And in the air, flying above, we have 2 Fang helicopters and a Viper glider. This is a great beachfront shot, and storming the beach are from the G.I. Joe team are Shipwreck and Polly, Wetsuit, and Cutter. It's definitely a preview of what's in the book without giving away any crucial plot points. Now, cover B by Phil Murphy. To start off with, in the background, like superimposed over the sky, is Cobra Commander holding the lamp with the genie. And so in the foreground of that, you have a battle of G.I. Joe versus Cobra waging on. You have the Sky Striker shooting down some generic Cobra jets, kind of reminiscent of that first G.I. Joe miniseries, The Mass Device. And you have Dragonfly helicopters shooting at a HISS tank and a trooper. While in the foreground, we have Duke and Spirit. and it looks like Destro is getting ready to confront Duke. This is another cover that could easily be one of those VHS cover images. Now, the retailer incentive cover by Will Mignot is a very indie comic looking image. You've got the Average Joe band from Cold Slither rocking out. Duke is front and center with a star-spangled guitar and with a Real American along the neck. Footloose is also on guitar, and I can only assume Rock and Roll is on the RR shaped bass. Scarlet is on keyboard with Lady J and Covergirl on tambourines. Finally, we've got Shipwreck sticking his tongue out on the drums and Polly on the maracas. There's a lot of pyrotechnics on the stage and smoke. Now, to describe the art, you got some very heavy inks and saturated colors. I think what Mignot was going for was that everyone is really into this performance. The general mood on stage doesn't seem to mesh. The ladies appear smiling. Shipwreck is having a blast with his tongue out. Rock and Roll looks like he's concentrating, slapping that bass, sweating. Footloose looks like he's grunting, almost a sneer. And Duke just straight up looks angry. These facial expressions just make the whole performance on this cover feel disjointed. It's a solid piece, though, don't get me wrong. And if I saw it at the comic shop, I would have picked it up. But it's not a cover that I would go out of my way to order online. I ended up just getting cover A and cover B for my personal collection. Going into the issue itself, I think we've got another solid issue from this creative team. And if you haven't read this issue, I'm going to spoil it, so just fast forward if that matters to you. It begins with Scarlet setting up the Joe team for the next attack on Cobra and to rescue Duke. Flint and Quick Kick are the team leaders, and I immediately got the feeling that Burnham likes writing Quick Kick's dialogue. The scene closes out, Mainframe is manning the comms, and he makes kind of an off-character comment about needing to go along for the mission and that he can't sleep on planes. I know it's been a while since I watched the cartoons, but I don't remember these traits. I can also blame that on being much more familiar with his characterization on his file card and the original Marvel comic. But anyway, it's an attempt at subtle humor, and the punchline of Scarlet offering a crash course on sleeping on a plane just didn't land for me. When we turn the page, we are brought to the Cobra Arena, where Duke needs to fight, again, and when Cobra Commander lets the gladiators in, I couldn't help but notice the chests of these gladiators looked almost like the Visionaries action figures. I'm wondering if that wasn't an Easter egg? But next out of the gate was a Fatal Fluffy in its fatal form. Definitely a callback to the Pyramid of Darkness miniseries. We then jump over to Quick Kick's team, where they arrive to confront Cobra, but waiting for them is Storm Shadow and his team, consisting of Copperhead, Firefly, and Cobra Troopers. And thus begins the attack. One odd choice before I turn the page is you have Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow battling. While I know that is the traditional matchup, especially as G.I. Joe is presented in media these days, that wasn't the case back in 85 and 86 when G.I. Joe was on Sunbow. The writers did find it hard to write Snake Eyes, so Storm Shadow would be facing Spirit, as in 1984's Revenge of Cobra, or Quick Kick, as in the Pyramid of Darkness. But we turn the page, we get to the battle of Duke versus the Fatal Fluffies. One interesting thing was he kind of breaks the fourth wall or is self-aware because Duke makes a comment regarding why he's always the one captured. He says, "Why can't it be Flint?" I thought that was pretty smartly done. While the art is solid on this book as a whole, I really do enjoy the pencils in the art of Dan Shaning. The one thing that just felt a little off on this sequence was Duke grabs a net, and the net just seems not rendered well enough. It's rather faint, and the line work is very skinny compared to the rest of the inks on the page. So it just felt a little off on the sequence, which is a small nit to pick. But when we finish that sequence, we're brought back to Quick Kick's team, and as Quick Kick fights Firefly, Quick Kick is making his quips, and then another great joke is Shipwreck's complaining about how much Quick Kick is talking, and Spirit points out the irony of Shipwreck saying that, it's the pot calling the kettle black there. And then we're brought again back to that Snake Eyes Storm Shadow matchup. And then you turn the page, and now you have the Sky Beam, the beam going from the Cobra base, the Terradrome, into the sky, which is always a sign of, the final battle is coming. And that breaks up the fight between Quick Kick and Storm Shadow's teams. That brings us back to the Cobra Arena, where Cobra Commander is trying to negotiate his final wish with the genie. So the third wish has been cast in that previous sequence with Duke versus the Fatal Fluffy. And now the genie is explaining all the terms, and the Baroness realizes the third wish has been cast. So the Baroness races for the lamp, but the genie knows what's happening, and he does that stipulation of no Joe or Cobra can have the lamp until after the final battle. That's a great way to level the playing field for what's yet to come. We get a call back as the genie starts transporting or teleporting all the Joes and Cobra to the final battle. And the great callback is there's a plane with Scarlet and her team, and Mainframe is sleeping on the plane. So that's a great callback to early in the issue. You got to pay off for that joke. That's good. And then on the final pages, that's a double page splash, is Gung Ho is pictured in the foreground all the way to the left, and he doesn't have his Marine Corps chest tattoo, the old ball and anchor. We get the conclusion, so issue 4 will be the last. The final thing on the book is the PSA, and it's law and order, and it's animal cruelty. And it gets its point across rather cruelly. And after, the whole now I know knowing's half the battle, there's a little final comment by Law that if you pelt anything again with that slingshot, something else is going to happen. Just doesn't quite land for me. Now, this issue has plenty of action. Overall, it's a really good issue. It definitely served a purpose to get from point A to point B, the plot. It took me a couple reads to appreciate the book a little bit more, because there's actually some pretty good action in it with Duke in the arena and the fight between Kick and Storm Shadow, their respective teams. So you had some good conflict in the book, while it really tried to get the book from point A to point B. It's one of those things where you did need this sequence to finally get that third wish from the genie, and also to get you to that final battle in the final issue. And the book does read a little bit like those miniseries from Sunbow. Now, I think one of the flaws with this book feeling rushed is the fact that maybe this series needed a 5th issue to more follow that 5-episode, miniseries arc, where we could have fleshed out the beginning and the acquisition of the lamp, and then move through the wishes systematically, leading to the final battle and the final issue. Overall, I did enjoy it. It's a solid comic book. So the other book I managed to get my hands on is G.I. Joe 292. The creative team, of course, is writer Larry Hama. Cover B and the interior art is by S.L. Gallant. Inks by Maria Keene. Interior and cover B colors, J. Brown, Neil Uyetake, again on letters, Tom Waltz, group editor, and research specialist Diana Davis. Now, we also have cover A by Freddie Williams, and their colors for that cover are done by Fariza Kamaputra, and it's part of this Connecting Cover series. It's done in their wonderful style like watercolors. It's fun to see Xandar so prominently, and Helix expression makes me wonder what's the cover of 293. And when I initially was writing my notes, I had read the book a couple times, but I forgot the final image before we get to previewing issue 293. And I'll spoil it right now. It's Serpentor. So I really like how the theme of these connecting covers is working. That actually is made me really appreciate this Connecting Cover series more than previous go-arounds. Cover B was the preview image on the back of 290 with Dr. Mindbender and Cobra Commander riding in the golf cart around the casino with customers in the banks of virtual Texas Hold'em converted brainwave scanners. It's a nice, fun cover that lets the reader know what's going on inside. Again, telling what's going on without giving away what's actually going on in the book. And then you got the Retailer and Center cover by Jerry Kissel with Cullen Davis on covers. Now, this one is on the deck of the Flag while a Cobra Black Dragon VTOL takes off. In the air, you got Scarlet is kicking Baroness, and from the perspective, it looks like they're above the VTOL. And in the foreground, you got Duke punching Cobra Commander. Duke has hit Cobra Commander so hard that it has shattered the silver face mask. I've got two issues with this cover. Baroness and Scarlet being in midair. They just seem to be out of scale with the rest of the picture. Actually, the whole picture just seems out of scale. They just can't jump that high, so where do they fall from? They're on the Flag. You don't have anywhere to fall from unless you're in the tower, and they're way in front of the tower. You got the other one is Duke's face. Duke seems over-inked in general. You got lots of fine lines that define, the folds in his clothes. But his face, it looks like they wanted that same level of detail, and they over-rendered his nose. And it's kind of interesting because Brian Shearer on social media shared out a tutorial on inking or drawing noses. I got it in, he's also an email list. So it was kind of funny. So I picked up some notes while realizing what's wrong with the picture. So you have that, and then you also have the colorist use that hard line nose definition to shade, and it makes the nose even worse. Overall, I've seen all three covers in person, and I held the RI cover in my hands, but I just couldn't pull the trigger because it's a retailer incentive cover, so it's not $4. And even the owner of the local comic shop wondered how it got past editorial. And I was like, how did it get through Hasbro approval? It just didn't seem to be of that same quality, or some things should have been fixed before it got printed. Again, going to start talking about the plot points and stuff. So, spoiler alert, and skip ahead if you want it to the last portion of the show. We open with Mindbender and Laura 347, the CG, riding in that Cobra Casino golf cart into the casino, and Laura is asking all the questions so Mindbender can do the recap. This is a refreshing monthly comic characteristic. I love it. It makes the sit rep on the interior front cover redundant. And that's the difference between a trade paperback writer and a monthly writer like Larry Hama. It doesn't translate well if you're doing trade paperbacks the way Larry Hama is writing, but I'm here for that. I'm a monthly reader, so it also allows me not to read the prose of the sit rep. I love the faces Gallant draws, as they're definitely inked by Keane. Also in these opening pages, I noticed that Laura is no longer walking with a cane. But anyway, Mindbender's recapping his evil plans that involve capturing Snake Eyes to Laura's quiet lament. And then the not-so-secret reveal that we've got Serpentor 2.0 coming. Before anybody corrects me, I know this will be the third Serpentor in this continuity. However, the second one, the one that killed or got Snake Eyes killed, was just a clone of number one. So that's like version 1.5 or something like that. With this establishing of what's going on at the casino, Hama takes us back to the Transcarpathian Mountains to catch us up with the team that solved the Paris Crod's Transcarpathian Express hostage situation. Say that 5 times fast. They're riding in the helicopter, allowing Dawn to talk about how Snake Eyes' memories are leaking into her conscious self and how, frankly, it can be very awkward. Especially, we're talking about his feelings for Scarlet. Bahama breaks the tension by having the lone surviving terrorist have plastic explosive sewn under his skin with a tooth-mounted detonator. Emergency dental surgery ensues, only for him to lunge at Throwdown, grabbing a grenade. Throwdown pushes the terrorist out of the tomahawk, only to be restrained himself by Scarlet, once again reminding us of how the original Snake Eyes passed away. With a pause in that action, we're brought back to Cobra Island, and Mindbender regales us with how he was able to find the DNA of Genghis Khan, essentially the backbone of Serpentor 2.0, and also how the DNA was able to be extracted. This feels a wee bit drawn out, especially when he tells Laura of the other DNA donors for this new Serpentor. We don't get long stories. And this moves forward with the sleeper agent, a modified bat, Mei Ling, reporting back to the Revanche Blue Ninjas. Yeah, it's like, why is Cobra doing business with Revanche after they killed Cobra Commander's son, Billy? It's a little too neat, I guess. Finally, we're brought to the High Sierras after this revelation, where a grocer delivers supplies to Wade Collins, who's hiding out at Snake Eyes' cabin. Throwdown has written his adoptive father, and this is a good callback to issue 155, as Wade reads Sean's letter. S.L. Gallant shines in this sequence with images of Dawn, Mongoose, and Stalker doing maintenance on the vamp while we read Sean's words to his father. We also get a glimpse under the mask as Sean takes a sip of coffee. I can't express enough how good these layouts are here. It's you can take away the words, and it's really strong storytelling. The final page of the issue has Wade putting down the letter and greeting Timber 3 or 4, and Timber sniffs the letter, and I'm not sure why he would recognize Sean's scent. Here we are with another solid setup issue. Not so much action, but a lot of good human moments and light drama to propel the story forward. Some of the plot devices I'm not thrilled with, the brainwave scanner, Serpentor again, but this story has me invested, and that's what's important, and I am looking forward to seeing it through the end. When I first read these two books, I felt that this was a stronger story than Saturday Morning Adventures. However, I've read both of these multiple times in preparation, and I'm liking Saturday Morning Adventures number 3 more than this one, but just a bit, a wee bit. The final image we get is the Freddie Williams cover to issue 293, which shows Serpentor dead center with Cobra Commander's head in the background, shocking Dawn and Flint. This is actually like a great image of Serpentor, and I really hope after this cover we get him in issue 293. Before I get into this episode's vehicle review, I just want to say that there is one mail call I did forget to mention, and that was getting Dan Klingensmith's Volume 8 of Creating G.I. Joe. And it's kind of important because it has a one-page article on this episode's vehicle, the APC from 1983. Now, the APC is one of those vehicles. It does a yeoman's task of transporting your troops from the headquarters to battle and back again, should it have survived the battle. And there's a couple cool features for this that really makes this more than just a transport. And to start off with, in Klingensmith's book, the one thing I did learn was that the front of the APC was based on the Soviet BTR-60. And that was actually interesting to find out because the Hasbro design team took inspiration from a Soviet vehicle, which I think is kind of weird because, real American hero, Cold War, 1980s. But I will say this, back in the mid-80s, it didn't take away from the pleasure I got from this toy. This was something I got with flag points in a mail away. I wasn't really old enough in 1983. I was only 3 years old for most of the year. And let's take a closer look, shall we? The big thing about the APC is it can transport up to 28 action figures at a single time. One driver, one co-pilot, and 26 in the back. What's really unique is that, unlike later vehicles, every figure in the APC has kind of like two methods for them to be in the APC. And you can fit 8 characters on each side in the back. And they have the seat belt that snaps into place with a slot on one end and a peg on the other end. And these are commonly missing. So if you're searching, we'll get to that in a little bit. But not only do they have these little seat wells for their tukish to sit in, but they also have a foot peg for one foot to sit in. And I remember as a kid trying to get it all to fit together, and it didn't always work. In the center, you have 12 sets of 2 foot pegs. So the figures that would be standing up would have 2 feet in each foot peg. Granted, of course, we're not talking about 1982 or 1983 Scarlet with no foot peg holes. But so you had 2 foot pegs. But get this, on the top, if you don't have one of these, the canopy has, to coincide with standing up figures, slots that stick down, which restrains the heads from moving back and forth. So your standing characters, if they got a foot on the peg and the head in between this, they're not going to fall over. The engineering for transporting characters was actually well thought out. And finally, and I do mean this in transporting characters, the rear bumper of the APC extends out so you can get your hand and use it as a handy carrying case. And I can tell from certainty, I only had about 34 G.I. Joe figures when I was a kid. I absolutely used this guy to bring all my figures from upstairs to downstairs. And I do remember always being careful about putting them in and out. That was like the extra gimmick to the APC, making the troop carrier an actual troop carrier, if you get my drift. That was to top off what really was kind of sort of a plain vehicle. The APC's only means of armament is a 50 millimeter single fire auto control cannon. And that sits on top of the canopy, the canvas textured canopy, and pops off easy with 3 clips. And it's an auto control cannon. So that means the co-pilot or the driver or somebody else is manning that cannon. So nobody underneath it. And it doubles as a hatch. It's pretty cool. But let's get to another gimmick of the APC. As it is a 6-wheeled transport, much like, let's say, a deuce and a half, 2.5 ton army vehicle. But because the front is angular, like a BTR, it also serves as a boat, and it actually floats in water. Here we have an amphibious landing craft, and that's really what the APC stands for, amphibious personnel carrier, not armored personnel carrier, much like, let's say, the Monster Blaster APC from the 90s. The body of the APC is molded in a nice dark forest green, almost with a little olive tint to it. It's got a nice heft to it. When you got this in the mail or when you open the box, the bottom of the APC is a screwed together assembly. The wheels are glued onto the axles. It's not designed really to come apart. And you have wonderful detail. So start off with the interior. You got the molded seats for the driver and the co-pilot. And in between them is a console where you have dials and switches, potentially a screen, and you got some nice detail in between them. In front of the co-pilot, you have a little box. It looks like an ammo can. Maybe it's for a first aid kit. Maybe it's a glove box. And on the driver, you have the half steering wheel that has like two little circular pods onto the left and right of it, much like, let's say, a gauge and tachometer. And then behind the driver, over his left shoulder or by his like right upper arm, you have a little detail, and much of the same thing on the co-pilot side. You have another ammo box like thing by his right upper arm. And these details are welcome, much like, it's that model kit quality. And the seatbelts and steering wheel and the machine gun for the turret are all molded out of the same gray plastic. And those four things, the two seatbelts and the steering wheel and the machine gun turret, can be commonly missing from the APC. Other things to look for on the APC are the wheels. Sometimes the wheels fall apart from age. The glue will come undone, or they'll have been stripped off the metal axles. But you look at the front of the APC, of the bottom of the APC, and you have two little, I wouldn't call them tow hooks, but it looks like they were started to become tow hooks, but they're like little prongs sticking out. And then we move behind the front tires, and you have some nice detail with a suspension. And then you move to the rear tires for the dual axles, and you got some detail behind them as well for suspension. Just forward of the first rear axle is you have a little doors that don't open up, but they're just detail, maybe for storage. And then on the passenger side of the APC, there's like a little port in between the two rear axles. Now, behind the rear of the APC, you have like brake lights that are covered, and you have molded on pickaxe, axe, and let's say a giant sledgehammer. The rear bumper is detailed out, and it looks almost like you have a little fill in the middle of it. Now, one other area that the APC has something over a lot of the other vehicles in the G.I. Joe line is if you flip it upside down, it has a wonderfully detailed undercarriage with drive shafts, the differentials. You can see the transmission, the oil pan for the engine. It's an absolute wonderful, like they really put some effort into the mold of this. It really makes it stand out as, again, that model kit aesthetic of the stuff that G.I. Joe is known for, especially in the early line. There's two other main parts of the APC. The first is the front hatch that will, once you remove the rear canopy, this flips forward with the two little hooks that mount into the chassis. And you have some clear plastic that sits behind it to create windows for the driver and passenger. You have essentially a first aid kit on the front and an instrument cover. You have some nice textured X details. They're little X's that go up across the front. And on top of it, you have something that resembles like a light bar, like let's say emergency vehicle, but it's still molded in that same dark green. Overall, it's nice. The windows for the driver and the passenger and the co-pilot, they're not rectangular. They have a little angle to them, and it doesn't run the whole width. So it gives a sense that there is adequate protection for the occupants of this APC as they're doing battle, which is kind of, a lot of it's in contrast to the other toys in the line where they were much more toyetic. This one is much more like very realistic, much more like a model kit of what actually would be used in battle in 1983. Now, the final thing to look at is the actual canopy. So it's molded in plastic. It is molded in a tan or khaki plastic. It has painted on stripes, camo stripes in like a wavy pattern, much like Recondo. And I've seen these very sharp. I've seen these very blurry. Some people call it a variation. I just think it's just a production line process where they put the masking on. Maybe the masking was lifting when they were painting this. I don't really consider it much of a variant along the lines of the APC. The center front of the canopy does have the area for the machine gun. So the machine gun cap has a little molded on canopy that would simulated pop out, but obviously it doesn't. And it has little detailing here and there for, just to give it texture. And around it, there is, some other details like a cylinder, something that looks like a little bit of a winch with wire, which really makes this feel like an actual military vehicle, and that's great. Now, when the canopy goes on, it has 4 tabs around the base, and each tab has a little clip and hook. And I know from personal experience that those little clips will sometimes break off. It is another common feature of the APC, as it is a 39-year-old toy in many instances. The APC didn't come with a driver, and there are a lot of drivers in the G.I. Joe line. Now, for me, when I was a kid, Cross Country version 1 from 1986, the Havoc driver, he was my driver for the APC. Now that I have more characters and think about it more, Clutch is an obvious answer to drive this. Steeler absolutely could drive this. Just about, Toll Booth, Wild Bill doesn't look out of place. A lot of Joes can drive this. This really lends well to the G.I. Joe line. And any G.I. Joe that looks like a traditional soldier doesn't look out of place inside the APC. I mean, a Steel Brigade would look fine. Duke. I mean, the list goes on and on. If there was any way I could fault the APC, would be that it's using 6 oversized tires rather than a traditional dually structure where you would have something that would mimic more of an 18-wheeler on the road. That's an easily look past detail on this toy. It, for me, is a top tier vehicle. And how would I rate a vehicle such as the APC? It floats. It doubles as a troop carrier that literally is designed for you to load your action figures into it and bring them over to your friend's house or somewhere else in your house or backyard, so you're not grabbing everything. This is, quite honestly, it's out of 6 tires. Let's just say this is a 6-tire vehicle. I mean, it's almost perfect. What it lacks in firepower, it makes up for in realism. And in my collection, I have 2 of them, only because it is kind of big. It isn't really an offensive vehicle, but to me it's important enough to have 2. So if I was ever to load up all my G.I. Joes and send the team out to Springfield or the Terradrome, heck, float it across Long Island Sound and get it to Staten Island, it is just an amazing vehicle, and not much else other than gush over it for another 10 or 15 minutes. And with that, this concludes the first episode of Year 2 of the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod, the strange, but not estranged, nerdy little brother of The Pint, a pop culture podcast, recently renamed for branding purposes by ARPCO Industries, a subsidiary of Extensive Enterprises. I've been your host, Gary. Thanks for listening, and as always, you can find us on Anchor.fm, our host, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Good Pods, and other fine podcatchers. This comes in handy when recommending the pod, as it's kind of redundant as you've listened to the end, and you should know how you're listening to your podcasts. Also, if you've got a moment, please subscribe, like, rate, or leave a, hopefully, 5-star review. Doing this really makes a difference and only helps to improve and grow this podcast. For more Chaplin's Assistance Motorpod, be sure to check out our social media at ChaplinJoePod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or send an email to chaplinjoepod@gmail.com. And lastly, before I go, one final missile for the masses. Be decent to each other. See ya.